Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this episode, I cover my first impressions of White Castle, with some comments on Red Cathedral too. This is a 2023 game designed by Isra C. and Shay S., art by Joan Gardier, published by Devir. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in 80 minutes. Its complexity is a 3.01 out of 5 on BoardGameGeek. Its overall ranking on BoardGameGeek now is 250, and average rating is 8.0 out of 10. This first impression video here is partly due to your input on BoardGameGeek on my blog. I occasionally put up polls for fun, but sometimes they help direct me on games that I should play according to your interests. If you want to check out the scripts I post for these videos and participate in the polls as well, telling me what games I should play next, go ahead and subscribe to my blog on the BoardGameGeek. The link should be in the channel description. Now for a quick game overview. White Castle is a tight, medium-weight Euro-style game, where you utilize dice drafting and dice worker placement to take actions. The goal of the game is to place out your clan of gardeners, warriors, and courtiers onto Himeji Castle, and whoever has the most points after 3 rounds of 3 turns each is the winner. I won't go through all the rules, and hopefully you are familiar with how the game works, but I'll go through some things that I like about the game. First, the ever-changing worker placement spots. I like the fact that when you place out your dice, particularly in the castle, depending on the strength and the location of the dice, you get to take an action depicted on a card in that location. During the game, as you move courtiers up your castle, you take those cards and slot them into your own tableau, serving as a way to get resources in the game through other actions, but also replacing that castle location with a new card. The tactical nature of the worker placement spots keeps this game fresh and interesting during the game and in between games. Second, the economy of dice drafting. You are free to take any dice from the end of each bridge, and after doing so, it slides the closest die to that spot. When you draft a die, you place it on a worker placement spot, and the difference between that, the pips on the dice that you drafted, and the pips depicted on the space, denote how many coins you may pay or receive. That gives the sense that any of these actions are possible, but for the right price. Also, in a 3 to 4 player game, you can stack a die on top of another one to take that same action that someone else had placed before, thus tactically changing what spaces might be available to you at a given moment. Last, very tight gameplay. With virtually 9 turns in this game, to be successful, one needs to evaluate the dice, the worker placement actions, and ultimately the goal of the game, which I think is focused on getting courtiers into the castle, and to take as many combinations of actions with 1 turn as possible. You're always on the lookout for what is feasible and what would give you the most bang for your buck, but it is agonizing when you don't have that much time to accomplish what you need to do, and when you do so, it feels like a miracle. Now for game comparisons. Obviously the first game is Red Cathedral, an earlier title made by these 2 designers. This is where I'll talk about my experiences with Red Cathedral briefly, as these games have some similarities and I've only played Red Cathedral once. In Red Cathedral, you also draft dice, but around a rondel, and using the pip numbers on these dice, you move around, gather resources, and take bonus actions with the goal of claiming blueprints of cathedral parts and delivering resources to these blueprints to flip those over and gain points. While the dice drafting is similar, there is no limit to Red Cathedral as far as turns go, as there is in White Castle. So you potentially could have longer games with Red Cathedral. Resource management feels similar, and the board, the game, and the goals for both games don't feel as grandiose as other heavy Euro-style games, as both games are in a relatively smaller box. But for me, both games mechanically work different enough that they are separate games in practice. Next is Age of Civilization. White Castle is a lot like Age of Civilization, where both games are very limited in the turns that you take, shortening the length of the game and creating agonizing decisions each turn. Both games utilize worker placement and a variety based on cards, and so the replayability for both games is high, in my opinion. I would say that White Castle is a little bit heavier with rules than Age of Civilization, but they both hit the same mark as far as how much brain power I want to commit in a short amount of time. Finally, my Rosenberg picks. I think the 2 games that most approximate White Castle are Eriwa and Nusfjord. These are Rosenberg's streamlined worker placement games, that are bigger and longer than White Castle, but feel very much the same when it comes to mechanisms, rules overhead, and the variety of cards in each game. I'll compare the solo challenges of Ediwa to the solo gameplay of White Castle. More to come on that. Now for the peer review, looking over the comments that other players have made on BoardGameGeek and summarizing them here, both good and bad. For people who enjoyed the game and rated it highly, many people compliment this game for how much strategy there is in such a small box, and a somewhat short game time. It is a game that is somewhat easy to learn, but hard to master. Some people mention that strategically this game feels balanced over many plays, and that on each turn there is always a good choice out there, and the fun is trying to find the best option which doesn't take as long or feel as arduous as perhaps some other bigger box games. That said, many people have concerns about how quick the game is, and oftentimes they feel they were just a turn or two away from something big, but the game feels like it ends prematurely. Despite the quickness of the game, it can take longer than it should, at 4 players especially, because every action counts and therefore you want to take more time thinking about your turn, leading to prolonged analysis paralysis and a lot of downtime in between turns. The theme feels abstracted to some, and strategically, as opposed to those who praise the game, many players do not like how many actions there are, or at least how often they are switched in the middle of the game when you take those cards and slot them into your tableau. In addition, some people thought that the focuses of strategy felt overpowered. For example, focusing on the gardeners seemed to be a little bit too good of a strategy. And then finally, the solo mode is brutal, to the point where it seems imbalanced. Even on its easiest mode, the hurdle that you have to overcome just to have a chance at beating it sometimes feels impossible, and I can attest to this. After playing this game, I couldn't stop thinking about it though. My mind wandered into what I could have done better, and where I could have focused my time more, etc. Like I mentioned before, it gave me similar vibes to Age of Civilization, which was a really big hit for me last year. So the White Castle was checking off all those boxes that I felt were checked off by Age of Civilization. I get why people don't like the game, but for me, the tactical nature of the dice and the cards makes the game replayable and different every time, which for a shorter game like this, feels perfect to me. I do think that this game is best at 3 because you can stack the dice and have more options to place them on subsequent turns, whereas with 4 players, it may take too long, and at 2 players, it does feel more cutthroat. I do agree that the solo mode is very hard. There is an unofficial easier version though that someone made, and it has posted that on BoardGameGeek, so that may be an opportunity for new players to ease their way into the solo game as intended. But I believe that some people have made the regular mode work, and the challenge of overcoming that solo mode is enticing to me as I think more about the game. It is the same feeling that I get when I try the solo challenges of Ediwa. They seem impossible at first and force you to try new strategies, but with time and effort I believe they can be conquered, as the designer intended, and new avenues of strategy can unfold and help you in the multiplayer game. Overall, though, I think I would prefer to play Age of Civilization over White Castle, although I do rate them and consider them very close to each other. And I think this is so because I think I like the variety set forth in Age of Civilization better compared to White Castle, because the variety in each game is solely based on, especially in Age of Civilization, on the new Civilization cards that come out when a turn is taken, and that's it. And so strategically you can plan perhaps like 95% or so of the game from the beginning with hints of pivoting throughout the game, versus in White Castle, well, it is fun to kind of see things turn over so often in the game. There is a little bit more randomness at hand, and so it may be harder to strategize from the beginning. I think I like White Castle a little bit more than Red Castle, but I haven't played the Red Castle with the expansion yet, so I can't definitively say that. I think I like this because I like how limited the rounds are in the White Castle. The limit on the amount of turns that you take and really forces you to really make good decisions every turn, rather than having a turn where you may just pick a dice and it may feel like a waste. Don't get me wrong, I love the mechanisms and what you're doing in both games, but I think I prefer to have that limiting factor in these shorter types of games. I thoroughly enjoyed both, and I think White Castle is a recommend from me if you enjoy games that are a little bit quicker and designed to be shorter in nature, perhaps within an hour or so, but do provide that crunch that heavy gamers often tend to enjoy. I think it would be worth trying White Castle if you like that. Thank you for consulting with me today, and don't forget to check out the blog on Board Game Geek to follow along in my journey of board gaming. And I hope that you schedule an appointment with me real soon. Take care.